What's up, guys? This is Ray, Apple Valley Astrologer. Today's the 8th of March, 2017. So, yesterday I uploaded a video talking about the origins of Saturn, not only in mythology and folklore, but how it's attributed to astrology, i.e. mostly associations with medieval ancient astrology and medical astrology as well, because that's essentially where the methodology for diagnosing disease and everything stems from. So I briefly mentioned in that video about how not only is Saturn a malefic, and still is to this day. I went over thorough discussions and gave examples as to why. I also, of course, mentioned the other malefic partner in this case, which would be Mars. And again, there is a lot of dispute in the astrological community and obviously, modern today occult science practices, that Saturn and Mars are not malefics, but yet a lot of those people who dispute the malefic label with Mars and Saturn still attribute the characteristics or the function of Saturn and Mars in the way that the ancients or back in medieval times they attributed to them, and people just are either confused on how the mechanism works, why it functions that way, or they need a dictionary. I'm not trying to be mean, just trying to be straightforward here. Anyway, so I'm going to go ahead and give you some actual examples that I've pulled from some ancient manuscripts. There's medieval attitude towards astrology, and the Old English herbal, myths and legends of Babylonia. In ancient cultures were known as magicians casting or performing protective spells with the treatment of sacred herbs. That's essentially how herbology got started. Ancients attributed infectious diseases to evil energies or spirits inflicting harm. The condition was called flying venom. Folklore depicts a worm-serpent creature, so that's where the serpent actually comes into play with Saturn and Satan and all that. And I would assume also, besides the animal instinct kind of survival factor, why there's some sort of hypervigilant fear with snakes through someone's cognitive development, because obviously fear is a conditioned response. So you're taught to be afraid of those things. And a lot of that might derive from this folklore that a serpent causes disease. Because obviously back then they didn't understand, the anatomy of getting a virus and the process with all that, so they automatically attributed it to being something that they can't see that must be evil that's hurting them. Folklore depicts the worm-serpent creature of demonic origins harming the ill and stealing their life force. So Mars is attributed to life force. That's why specific hard aspects, or even if you are familiar with death signatures, which there clearly are some, Mars can be involved. Also with Mars falling into the detriment or the fall dignity, and then having some hard aspects to some other planet alignments that would be unfavorable, could cause illness, terminal illness, death, or some sort of death signature. Diseases attributed to the worm or the serpent continued many centuries thereafter. Later manuscripts mentioned a worm in the tooth, which, if you're familiar with that one movie that came out a couple years ago, not Darkness Falls, but the one that says, are you afraid of the dark? Or don't be afraid of the dark, that's what it is. And I believe it was 2 or 3, maybe 4 years ago. And it's that story of these little, they look like gnome creatures of some kind, where they actually come in and steal teeth out of children's mouths. That's actually the origin of the folklore for the tooth fairy. So the spitting venom serpent demon that is known to the Saxons and the Babylonians is the original mythology attributed to the tooth fairy. FYI, just in case you didn't know. So referencing the Leech Book 2, an incantation for toothaches from the Babylonian text describes this folklore to believe that worms in one's teeth. I'm not going to read that. If anybody's interested in that incantation, they can message me and I'll give it to them. Babylonian priests were known as medicine men. Other related names would be sacrificer, soothsayer, necromancer, sorcerer, and charmer. Priest and medicine man's job description was to secure people from the attacks of evil demons who inflict disease. Oh, my bad. The wills of the witches and the forecast, the future, to discover the will and intention of the gods. So that's also where the misconceptions with witchcraft being evil and then some witchcraft being good came into play also. Because rituals used to be attributed to people getting sick. So when somebody would come down with like influenza or pneumonia or something like that, they would actually believe that there's some sort of demon, ether spirit, that would then come and attack you and try to take your life force. They correlated those exact moments when people would basically come down with an illness with different astrological patterns that specifically have to do with Saturn and Mars. More particularly Mars in this case, because Mars is associated with your life force. The first house, the ascendant, the life. So the polarity of that would be symptoms that would manifest as disease. So that's why that association in medieval astrology exists. Also, funny enough, the origin of like demons, I've talked about that, monsters, ghosts, the ether spirits, all of that, horror kind of fantasy or, creatures, mythological creatures, actually stems from disease. It does. They attributed different kinds of diseases that people would get to different creatures or monsters that are evil they can't see, that are out to harm man. So that's why in a lot of old horror flicks, you have no idea why the creature's chasing you. You just know to run. That is a metaphor for ancient symbolism to stray away from the evil. And that's also why you're not supposed to be tempted, because the way that they're able to find you is if you are provoking them and or drawing them to you by engaging in something that would be dark or evil. And depending on who you ask, would depend on what's dark or evil in that time frame because of sociological trends and all that. But funny enough, garlic in homeopathic and medical astrology is a remedy, not only antibacterial, antiviral, which would help with obviously cleansing of the blood or getting rid of some sort of virus or immune system, because your bloodstream being healthy is important, because you have your red and white blood cell count in there as well, and that's part of how you fend off infection and disease. So if you incorporate garlic not just into your dietary supplement, but if you get like garlic tinctures, like I make those, I take them all the time, or if you use garlic in some way, shape, or form for some sort of supplementation and or medicinal, like a high volume of dosages for medicinal intervention, it can help with blood disorders, blood diseases, or something of that sort. So I find it fascinating that Dracula, of all people, obviously the origins, the actual historical origins of Dracula has to do with like Elizabeth Bathory and Vladimir, whatever that guy's name is, the Impaler, because they shedded blood everywhere. So obviously there's that tied to it as well. They're more of the real life manifestations of the folklore that was ingrained into them from, passing through cultures. And taking those real life characters and then taking the origin of disease symbology and mythology. In some of the older, cheesier vampire movies, did you find it fascinating that they put a garland of garlic around somebody? Because wreaths, actually, the origin of wreaths, the things that you put on your door and everything for decoration, actually stem from warding off the evil spitting venom spirits from taking your life force, your Mars energy, which always correlated and seemed to happen when there were hard aspects with Mars. That is why Mars is attributed to malefic things. It takes your life force away. Or, more or less, it was correlated directly with pandemics, epidemics, or death, potential death by disease, or risks of dying because of illness. And even so, after Mars has some sort of aspect that would trigger illness, if Saturn got into the mix, Saturn would usually come and finish the job and kill you. And obviously in ancient times, the only planets that they really attributed to their astrological configurations would be the 7 ethers. So it was the Sun through Saturn. And that's why. And also the fact that the concept of when people die and there's darkness and all that, and that there is no life or abundance of force given energy when the sun is obviously not casting light, that is where they attributed darkness with death and darkness with Saturn, because it was the last planet. So that, I was supposed to kind of more or less go into Mars, why Mars is a malefic. But that's the origin of why Mars is a malefic. And that's the key term here with malefics, is that malefics take something away. You will end up experiencing some sort of loss or debilitation or weakness or impairment as a result of aspects attributed to the malefic planets and their functions. This is a very important thing for you to grasp if you ever actually intend to either interpret it for yourself or to ever study medieval or medical astrology. So until you understand and accept that Mars and Saturn are both considered and classified as malefics, you will never be able to use the medical astrology associations that you do. So all the new age astrology enthusiasts that really want to get into homeopathic stuff but are having problems connecting the dots trying to diagnose disease, until you accept the original classification and function of the planets as they are, the benefics, the malefics, and then the ethers, you will never be able to accurately predict or diagnose disease with medical astrology. So, this is more of a, I guess, a rant. I was trying to be helpful, but I think I'm definitely channeling some. In my weekly forecast I did earlier this week, there's some sort of combative aspect going on that would be attributed to Mercury in some way, shape, or form, and I'm clearly demonstrating that right now. But I'm gonna go. So.
Hello, is there someone there who cares for God-forsaken souls and God-forsaken man? Is there someone there